Hurricane Irma struck Florida this weekend, and while the extent of the damages are still unknown, we're hearing multiple reports of local residents coming together during this devastating storm to give one another a hand and to help ease the burden of this sad situation. Black Lives Matter volunteers came out to help rescue some Air Jordans and other shoes from a local Foot Locker. Fearing
Time if you want. You better get up. Time if you want. Back. You better back it up. You better back it. Back it up.
Troglodytes who think gentrification and more welfare will save America. And gentlemen, so a lot of hay was made in the wake of the 2016 election about, this happens every time, who did the most violent counties vote for? Was it white trash in Mississippi or white trash, a lot of white trash in the South? Voting for Donald Trump? Are they the most violent people in America? Those poor, poverty-stricken hillbillies? And a lot of hay was made about them on both sides. I would like to mention, before we get too far in this, Snopes and the Washington Post. I get a kick out of how a lot of people run to Snopes to everything. If they need a quick answer and they don't know anything about it, so they just vomit forth whatever came out of Snopes, and then they think the Snopes is like the ultimate fact check. And you got all these other websites. If we put fact, we're gonna put fact in our URL on our website, and that means we're factual. No. So Snopes and the Washington Post came out with some garbage, and they fell into the same trap of the people who were saying it. The opposite, that Hillary Clinton supporters were the most violent people in America, which you'll kind of find out that's kind of true. But what they did, and I'll let you find this for yourself, because you'll find it. Snopes said, and the Washington Post, what they did is they put up a crime map from 2014, and they said that proves that it's not really, can't really say that all these violent counties voted for Hillary Clinton. The problem with that, there's two, and I explained this in the article. I'll have the link there. It's a lot better than the explanation I'll give here. But the biggest flaw with the FBI uniform crime reports, and remember this was a map for violent crime, is there could be 3 violent crimes that occurred in an incident, and only the most serious one, homicide, was reported. Meaning, you could have a lot of instances where there were violent crimes omitted, which would raise the violent crime rate for an area, which would make that violent crime map irrelevant. NIBRS, as it's called, NIBRS, it's the National Incident-Based Reporting System, is a lot better because you'll get all those crimes in there. Not every jurisdiction uses that. Plus, and you'll also see this if you read my article, it was true for both candidates, but especially more for Trump. You could have a Podunk County with 9,000 people, and they could have 2 homicides one year, which would be a sky-high homicide rate. And then they could have 0 homicides the next year, and that would be a homicide rate of 0. So you could see massive shifts. You could have an area which was a high crime area in 2014, and in 2015 it was a high crime area. In 2016 it was low. 2017 it was high. So using that crime map doesn't work. Until everybody goes to the National Incident-Based Reporting System, we're stuck with UCR, and that's why part of the reason I'm going with homicide, because then that would be the most serious crime, which would be reported, and some of the violent crimes wouldn't be reported because they're lesser violent crimes. You know what I mean? Stealing someone's car is not nearly as serious as killing somebody. So, and then Snopes also said there's a morsel of truth that highly populated Democrat areas tend to be violent. No, it's not a morsel of truth. It's more like a shepherd's pie. So what I did And I was looking for outliers. So what I did is I calculated a standard deviation. I took all of Hillary's winning percentages, or all her percentages from all the states, and then calculated a standard deviation. And I was looking for outliers. So any state that voted for her by where she received 60.08% or more would be considered an outlier. In the case of Trump, you would need a state, any state that voted for him and gave him 57.73% or more of the vote would be an outlier. So I was looking for those, and then I calculate the homicide rate, and as I found out, it's better. It's like if you were going to do this for 2018, you might want to wait till the beginning of 2019, because sometimes the states come out with better data. I've found out. I'm not saying the FBI uniform crime reports are worthless. They're not. But in a lot of instances, especially with Maryland, I found their actual homicide rate was a lot higher than the FBI reported. North Carolina's was a little bit lower. Not by much. And I think all in all, in the grand scheme of things, it didn't change a lot. But I took all the state homicide rates, calculated a standard deviation there. So any county with a homicide rate, or a state with a homicide rate of above 8.46 qualifies. So the states that qualified as far as being double outliers, which had super duper Trump support or super duper Hillary support, and again, go to the link I'm supplying and read this for yourself. I don't have a script here. I'm just going to go through this. I'm not like Stan Cedar, that Roman Polanski supporting weirdo. He's got a script in front of him and he reads off it. And Jacqueline Glenn, she just copies from everybody. And Old Fart Rants, I think he does 3 sentences and then edits the video and does 3 more sentences and then edits the video and then just 3 more sentences. And it's really nauseating, and he's ugly too. So it's not going to be like those clowns who are like, have a pre-canned ham rant. So Washington, D.C. had an outlier homicide rate and an outlier as far as Hillary support. Louisiana had an outlier homicide rate and were an outlier as far as Trump support. So those were the double outliers. Now, and again, I'm looking for outliers. That's the most important thing. So somebody might say, oh, you excluded the red. You did that just to exclude some red states that weren't quite as violent. No, it's called calculating a standard deviation and then finding anything outside that one standard deviation. Missouri was also a high homicide state. Did not have one standard deviation above for Trump's voting percentage, so it wasn't a super duper Trump state. But Trump did win it handily, and I went over that one, and it's got a massively high homicide rate. Maryland was another one. So, and again, I hate to belabor the point, read through this yourself, okay? I'm not going to cover everything here because I'd be here for hours, because unlike, like I said, with Stan Cedar or Jacqueline Glenn, that old silicone Sally, and old brown teeth out there who doesn't brush his teeth, I have some actual info and actual references, actual links, and I didn't just copy it from somebody. So we're going to go over this real quick. So when I did Missouri, for Missouri, all Hillary counties that had outlier homicide rates and had outlier Hillary support. Here's what it was. It came out to 300, this is 2016, 381 homicides in Missouri in Hillary counties, 529 for Missouri total. That's 72% of the total. And Trump counties had 43 homicides, which is 8.1%. In a state that Trump won by a large margin, not an outlier margin, but a large margin, and has a very homicide rate, the most violent counties, remember, Hillary only won 3 counties in Missouri. The most violent counties are Hillary counties. And St. Louis City, which is an independent city, is the worst of them all. St. Louis, I feel sorry. especially for any conservative or libertarian blacks in St. Louis City. If you can get out, please do. If you're ready for retirement, you might want to think about retiring a little early and then moving to anywhere but St. Louis. So keep that in mind. Here at Louisiana, that's another one that was pretty bad. Hillary parishes. Keep in mind, this is a state that was super duper Trump support and has a incredibly high homicide rate. Hillary parishes had 178 homicides. Again, I'm just going to say this to make sure everybody's listening and knows it. Hillary had to be an outlier homicide rate, and Hillary had to have outlier support. You know, Hillary couldn't win the county with 49.7%, and Trump have 49.5%, and I would count it. Okay, so keep that in mind. Hillary parishes had 178 homicides, 554 for Louisiana total. That's 32.1% of all Louisiana homicides. Trump parishes had 174 homicides, or 31.4%. In a state that was overwhelmingly pro-Trump and has a sky-high homicide rate, that's quite astounding that Hillary would win that many. Louisiana is a dangerous place, folks. There are a lot of safe parishes, but also a lot of dangerous ones. Maryland. Here's the next one. Maryland. It's pretty obvious. Maryland's homicide problem is confined to 3 counties. The lion's share of them, 406, were Hillary counties, which is 76% of the total. Trump counties only had 4 homicides, or 0.7% of all Maryland homicides. So basically in Maryland, you're safe unless you're in Baltimore. Outside of Baltimore, you're pretty much safe. There's only 3 counties that are a problem in Maryland, and Hillary counties, and again, it's Baltimore. Did you get that? 406. Hillary counties had 406 of all homicides in Maryland, 76% of the total. Trump, 4 homicides in his counties, 0.7% of the total. Then there were a number of states. Hawaii was an outlier, had outlier support for Hillary Clinton, but you're safe in Hawaii. District of Columbia had a homicide rate of 19.8. And Hillary Clinton's vote percentage there was over 90%. Washington, D.C. also leads the way in STDs, if I remember right. So, yeah. Washington, D.C. is not... Put it this way, Washington, D.C., St. Louis is so bad they would probably want to move to Washington, D.C. Personally, I think Washington, D.C. is just a giant toilet. Wyoming and West Virginia were 2 states that Trump won handily, but neither one of them really have a homicide problem. Alabama. Here's another one, because Alabama has a high homicide rate. Alabama has a lot of dangerous places. In Alabama, Trump counties had 121 homicides. Trump counties had 121 homicides, 396 in Alabama. That's 30.5% of the total. And Hillary counties had 52 homicides, 13.13% of the total. And then there were a lot of high homicide counties in Alabama where neither candidate got 50% or didn't get outlier support. And I go over some of them that I didn't include. But there you can see Alabama, overwhelmingly GOP, and there are a lot of violent areas. So maybe go look up. I'll let all you guys go to the Census Bureau data and see the demographics of those counties. California is relatively safe outside of a few areas. Oakland's not a place I would want to live, but for what it's worth, there were only 68 homicides in Clinton counties in California. That's only 3.5% of the total. And 9 homicides in the only Trump county, which was 4.45% of the total of all the homicides in California. There are a few areas in California that aren't safe, but overall, you're pretty safe in California. A lot of homeless people in Los Angeles and San Francisco, though, so we'll see how that goes. Texas is another one. Progressives like to pick on. Texas, they got more guns and cattle and brain cells. But for what it's worth, 64 homicides in Trump counties in Texas. That's only 4.3% of the total. And one homicide in the lone Clinton County, 0.1% of the total. So there's not a big signal out of Texas there. And again, just go read the article. Couldn't find much good information on Mississippi. I would have liked to have found more information on Mississippi, but couldn't. Tennessee. For Tennessee, Trump's vote percentage was more than one standard deviation above his average. So it was a super duper Trump state. The homicide rate was not an outlier, but it's considered high by national standards. So, but for what it's worth, in Tennessee, Hillary counties had 282 homicides, 60% of the total, and Trump counties only had 5 homicides, 1.06%. We have a signal from Tennessee, in a state that was overwhelmingly pro-Trump. The really violent counties were Hillary counties. Nashville is particularly bad. Nashville wasn't very good, and Memphis is not exactly the safest place in the world either. Arkansas. Good old Arkansas. Because there are a lot of problem areas in the South, but it's not always the South. I see a lot of progressives, especially online, the experts who have no data, but they know how to regurgitate talking points. They automatically think, that's another thing bothers me. For decades and decades, the South was a Democrat stronghold. That's not true, thanks to Barack Obama anymore. But there's still a lot of areas that are very Democrat dominated and have a lot of violence. So, but these Google actuals that hang out in forums don't know that. So here's Arkansas. It's got a high homicide rate well above the national average, but not one standard deviation. And Trump's percentage of the vote was more than one standard deviation above his average. So it's a super duper Trump state. I'll also have you know, just food for thought, there were a few counties in Arkansas where neither candidate got a high enough percentage of the vote that have very high homicide rates. So keep that in mind, and I'll let you read that for yourself. Trump counties in Arkansas that had super duper Trump support had 38 homicides. That's just 18.18% of the total. 18.18% of the total, 38 homicides in Trump counties. And Hillary counties just had 10 counties, and that was just one county, 4.7% of the total. So you don't really get a signal out of Arkansas. Michigan's a very safe state, at least for what I looked at. I'm not looking at, some people may criticize, you're not looking at several years of data, and I would like to, but we're talking about the election in 2016, so that's why I stuck to just that 1 year. As I said, Michigan's pretty safe, except for a few bad apples and a very large barrel. Hillary counties in Michigan had 319 homicides. That's 58% of the entire total in the state. And Trump counties had 2 homicides, 0.03% of the total. So we got a signal from Michigan, a state that Trump won and neither candidate got 50% of the vote. Hillary counties had 58% of all the homicides in the state. So we got a signal there from Michigan. Typically in Michigan, the high populated areas, go look at the demographics if you really want to make your progressive friends mad. Go look at the demographics. Illinois. Surprisingly, most areas of Illinois are pretty safe, except for there's that one county, Cook County with Chicago, Outside of that, there's just a few that are really bad. East St. Louis, and I've got a few little side notes. I don't go by cities. I just counties, but I'll give you one quick example of this. St. Clair County in Illinois had a homicide rate of almost 14.5. And Hillary only got 50.03% of the vote there, so I didn't count it. However, East St. Louis, which has less than 27,000 people and had 27 homicides with a homicide rate of over 100. That's the worst. That's by far the worst. And Hillary got 97.42% of the vote in East St. Louis. That's just one little anecdote for you that you'll find a few of those in there. I'm not going to read them all off. So in Illinois, Hillary County's had 834 homicides. Hillary County's had 834 homicides. That's 80.1% of the entire total. And Trump County's had 11 homicides, 1.05% of the total. So, and that's a state that Hillary easily won, but her total was not more than one standard deviation above her average, so it wasn't a super Hillary state. Quickly get some of the rest of them done. Oklahoma. Trump County's had 101 homicides, 42.2% of the total. Hillary didn't win a county in Oklahoma, so it's not her fault. So we have a signal from Oklahoma. A signal from Oklahoma there. The really violent areas are Republican areas in Oklahoma. Georgia, here's another interesting one. High homicide rate, not more than one standard deviation above the average. Neither was Trump's percentage, but Trump did win Georgia. So, in Georgia, Hillary County's had 362 homicides, which was 54.35% of all homicides in Georgia. Trump County's had 2 homicides. So we got a big signal from Georgia in a state that Hillary, she didn't get, if you're looking for outliers, she didn't get blown out in there, but she basically had no chance of winning Georgia. But the really high homicide areas are Hillary strongholds. North Carolina, neither candidate got 50%, but their homicide rates considered high, not one standard deviation above the average, but still considered high. In North Carolina, this is down south again. For you progressives who think the South's nothing but dumb Republican rednecks shooting each other, Hillary counties in North Carolina had 129 homicides, 19.2% of the total. Trump counties had 81 homicides, 12.07% of the total. So we don't really have a signal there, but just because it's a high homicide rate in the South doesn't mean it's GOP territory. And there, I also noted there were several Hillary counties that had less than 60,000 people, depending on how you define podunk. What's a podunk county? Does it less than 80,000, whatever? But there were 6 counties of 60,000 people or less that were high homicide counties, and Hillary won those counties easily. So just because it's rural down south in the rural areas doesn't mean it's just Republican. A few other anecdotes. Lake County, Indiana. That's where Gary's at. Gary, Indiana. They had a homicide rate of 14.6. Hillary won over almost 58% of the vote there. Now, that wasn't more than one standard deviation above her average, but what I did is I went back. I also calculated their win totals when they won a state, what their margin of victory was. And if their margin of victory was more than one standard deviation above their average win total, whether they won it by 4% or 5%, then I counted that county. And Lake County was one of those. And I explain all that in there if you want to read it. Marion County is another county in Indiana that's really violent. Homicide rate of over 18, and Hillary won that easily as well. New Jersey is a state. It's highly populated. They're crammed in like sardines, and most places in New Jersey are completely safe, except there are 2 exceptions. Camden County, New Jersey, and most of that can be attributed to Camden City. Camden County had a homicide rate of over 11.1. Hillary won over 64% there, but Camden City had a homicide rate of over 63, and Hillary won over 94% of the vote there. She is more popular in Camden City than she is in Washington, D.C. And Camden City has a homicide rate so high, even people in D.C. are saying, wow, you guys are violent. Philadelphia Are you surprised that Philadelphia County, Pennsylvania has a high homicide rate of over 17.4 and Hillary won over 82% of the vote there? Are you surprised? Nevada had 3 violent counties. 2 of them were podunk counties that Trump won. And one of them wasn't. I'll let you guess which one that was. That was Clark County. I'll just give it away. And Hillary won Clark County. Most areas of Nevada are safe. But the 3 most violent counties, two of them again were podunk counties. And one was Clark County, won by Hillary. That's another thing I should mention real quick. There were more Trump counties where, and I mentioned this in the piece too, where if you take away 1 or 2 homicides, the homicide rate would go to 0 or be almost nothing. So, for example, you could have a county with 10,000 people, just saying it had 2 homicides. Well, the next year it had 0 homicides. There weren't a lot of Hillary counties. There were some, but not as many where 1 or less 2 homicides, 1 homicide or 2 fewer in, say, St. Louis City or Fulton County, Georgia, is a footnote. In Podunk County, Mississippi, where there was 1 homicide and 10,000 people, 1 homicide less means there's no homicide. So you have to keep that in mind. In Virginia, there's a lot of independent cities in Virginia, so that was easy to look up. And there's a lot of violent independent cities in Virginia. Virginia had 480 homicides in 2016. Those Hillary independent cities had 219, 45.6% of the total. Trump counties had 2 homicides, 0.4% of the total. Yes, Virginia, Democrat counties are very violent. So you can see there are several states that Trump won easily and have high homicide rates, but the reason they have a high homicide rate is because of Hillary areas. And again, going back to what Snopes said, some clown at Snopes, there's a morsel of truth to these highly populated Democrat areas being violent. No, it's a shepherd's pie, dude. Quit being politically correct. Milwaukee County, Wisconsin. You're very safe in Wisconsin unless... Now, granted, at any given time, you could be bludgeoned to death anywhere, but what's the likelihood of it? Well, if you're walking around anywhere in Wisconsin outside of Milwaukee County, the chances of you being a victim of homicide are incredibly slim. However, if you enter Milwaukee County, Wisconsin, your chances go up significantly because it had a homicide rate of over 16. Hillary won that county with over 65% of the vote. And Milwaukee City has a homicide rate of over 23.6. It's the problem child within Milwaukee County. Like I said, Milwaukee City had a homicide rate of over 23.6. Hillary won Milwaukee City with over 76% of the vote. So go ahead and digest all that data for yourself. Like I said, I could have gone over more, but I'm not going to bore you with any more. I have links to all the material. You'll find out again, there were several states that had Trump either won easily or were super duper Trump support, more than 1 standard deviation above his average, and then is a very violent state, and then you find out, but it's kind of weird that the most violent areas are Democrat counties. So I have to conclude, yes, there's more than a morsel of truth to some highly populated Democrat areas being violent. It's a shepherd's pie. And when you start looking at demographics, look at certain groups, because it gets very uncomfortable, People get, you're a racist if you start pointing out that certain ethnic groups, and end the war on drugs, too, by the way, end the war on drugs, commute all sentences for non-violent drug offenders. Aside from that, there are some ethnic groups, and especially the young ones, 25-year-old or less, that tend to be violent towards each other in large numbers in some of these poorer cities, and these large, poor, poverty-stricken cities, which are sliding down into a cesspool. And until we're able to grapple with that, and people can just admit it without being called a racist and having their life well, people basically try to destroy them over telling the truth. Until we can do that, America is going to continue to slide down in the cesspool. It's sad, you know. So what I said at the end is, some of them are waking up and realizing the victim card and the welfare state aren't having a positive impact. I would urge young black men to look at men like Thomas Sowell and Walter E. Williams as role models. Eric Holder, Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, not so much. I'd mention Barack Obama too, but he is married to the woman he loves, and their children have had a two-parent household for their entire lives. That's very important. I hope you learned a lot from this. I know I did, and I'm sorry if I bored you. I will do this again sometime. Vote Liberty. Vote Libertarian.